My name is Marin Callahan. I'm 33, and 3 weeks ago I catered my own mother's 60th birthday celebration, the same celebration my 5-year-old daughter wasn't allowed to attend. Imagine the scene. 100 guests packed under fairy lights inside a converted cedar barn. My mother clinking a fork against her wine glass, like she was announcing a coronation. A photographer positioning 2 rows of chairs against a linen backdrop, requesting, "Close family only, please." And my mother leaning toward me, in front of her church friends, her book club, and my sister's soon-to-be in-laws, sugar sweet, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Sweetheart, you can just wait by the kitchen." This next part is family. I stared at her. Then I stared at that backdrop, at how there wasn't a single inch of it meant for my little girl. And slowly, I reached back, and pulled the strings of my apron loose. What came out of my mouth in the next 60 seconds turned my mother, my father, and my sister the color of the tablecloths, in front of every single guest they'd spent 4 months trying to dazzle. 100 people didn't make a sound. But none of that will make sense, unless I take you back to a folder I was never, ever supposed to find. If you're new here, welcome. This is the place where the people who give everything finally say what they've been swallowing for years. If you've ever been the one who shows up, pays the bill, and still gets left off the invitation, stay with me. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe, because I promise you, the ending of this one is worth every minute. 3 weeks before that party, I was standing in my kitchen at 5:30 in the morning, hand-folding dumplings for a stranger's baby shower. My daughter, Josie, sat cross-legged on the counter stool beside me, flour dusted across her cheeks, humming a song from her preschool class where she'd invented at least half the lyrics herself. She's 5. She talks to every dog she passes. She laughs with her whole body. Some people call that a handful. I call it a heartbeat. I run a small catering business out of Millbrook, a little town about 40 minutes outside Burlington, called Wildflower Kitchen. I built it 8 years ago, out of a second-hand convection oven, a van I still owed money on, and a battered tin recipe box that belonged to my grandmother, June. She's the one who taught me to cook, standing on a stepped stool in her lake cottage kitchen, before I was even tall enough to see over the counter. "You feed people like it matters, Marin girl," she used to tell me. I lost my husband, Eli, in a highway accident almost 3 years ago, back when Josie was barely 2, and since then, it's been me, that recipe box, a small business loan, and more late nights than I can count, keeping the lights on for both of us. That morning, my phone buzzed. My mother. "Marin, honey, I need you Saturday. Family sit down. It's important." Saturday, my parents' dining room smelled like furniture polish and something else I couldn't quite name yet, ambition, maybe. My mother, Diane, had a cream-colored binder splayed open on the table. My sister, Renee, 36, flipped through paint swatches with the concentration of a woman selecting a jury. My father, Walter, refilled coffee cups and mostly stared out at his tomato garden. "I only turned 60 once," my mother announced, "and we are doing this right." Doing it right meant Cedar Hollow, the big event barn just past the town line. 100 guests, string lights, a 4-course dinner built entirely from Grandma June's old recipes. She spun the binder toward me and tapped a tab labeled menu. "And naturally, you'll handle the food, sweetheart. Consider it your gift to me. Not a request. An announcement, already filed." I did the math the way other women count backward from 10 to keep calm. 100 plated dinners, staff service, 4 courses. That isn't a gift, that's the down payment on a car. But I'd been feeding this family for 8 years, and "you'll handle the food" had stopped catching me off guard sometime around year 3. So I said the thing I always said. "Send me the guest count." Renee slid a swatch across the table without glancing up. "The linens need to be this bone color. Marilee hates anything stark white." Marilee Cade is my sister's future mother-in-law, old money, a gated property, a country club membership, and an opinion about literally everything. Renee had gotten engaged to Preston Kate a year and a half earlier, and my entire family had rearranged itself around him like he was the sun. My mother joined Marilee's Garden Society within a month. My mother beamed at the two of them, then flipped to the final tab, photography, and her smile pulled tight at the edges, like a lid twisting onto a jar. Which brings me, she said, to something delicate. We've booked a professional photographer for the whole event. Everything needs to look flawless. She smoothed the binder flat. Which means Josie won't be joining us. I asked her to repeat that. She did, slower this time, the way you'd explain something to hired help who was falling behind. Josie isn't coming to the party. She's too much. She'll wreck the photographs. My daughter. Her only granddaughter on my side of the family. Excluded like she was a pet that couldn't be trusted around company. Renee examined her manicure. My father studied his garden stakes through the window. Nobody spoke up for her, and the quiet in that room had the feel of something already decided, before I'd even walked in. She's 5, Mom. She's a child, not a liability. Don't make this bigger than it is, Marin. It's one afternoon. She won't even remember it. Then she moved straight into florals, because in my mother's world, banning a grandchild and choosing centerpieces apparently occupied the same emotional weight. I stood, grabbed my coat off the chair back. Then you'll need to find yourself a different caterer. My mother smiled, not an angry smile, a patient one, the kind worn by someone who's already flipped to the last page of a story you think you're still writing. Sit down, honey. The contracts are already under your business name. 2 months prior, unbeknownst to me, my mother had booked the venue, the rental company, and the florist, every single one filed under Wildflower Kitchen, using vendor accounts she'd gotten access to through a church luncheon order months earlier. We got the vendor discount, she said, clearly pleased with her own cleverness. Isn't that resourceful? Resourceful. If I pulled out now, every cancellation fee landed on my company, not hers. In a town the size of Millbrook, I'd become the caterer who burned 3 vendors 2 months before peak wedding season. My name is my income. She knew exactly that, when she typed my business into those booking forms. I drove home gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached, and by the time I hit my driveway, I'd already made the one decision that actually mattered. Josie was finished, not finished with the party, finished standing in front of my mother waiting to be judged worthy. Whatever Saturday turned into, my daughter was going to spend it somewhere she was adored. That part wasn't up for discussion. Everything else, I'd figure out. That night, I called the venue to confirm what I already suspected. The coordinator was chipper about it. Yes, client on file was Wildflower Kitchen, deposit run through in the spring on my business card, the same card my mother had apparently borrowed the number from. I thanked her, hung up, and stood in my kitchen for a long moment. One detail kept snagging on me, a photographer booked for the entire day, and a 5-year-old banned outright. Since when did my mother care that much about pictures? To understand what happened after that, you need the last 8 years first. When Grandma June got too worn down to host anymore, the cooking passed to me the same quiet way that Recipe Tin did, all at once, no ceremony. I catered every holiday, every funeral, every anniversary after that. When June passed 6 years ago at 89, I cooked for 120 mourners with tears running off my chin, and I never once sent a bill. Family rate, my mother called it. The rate was 0. My husband, Eli, used to watch me load the van for another unpaid family event and just shake his head. Your family's love language is free labor, he told me once. I laughed it off. He didn't. I could always cover the groceries. What I couldn't cover, and didn't even notice I was paying, was the quieter math underneath it all. In that family's ledger, my time was worth nothing, my skill was worth nothing, and my presence came bundled in with the rental of the room. That night, once Josie was asleep, I sat at my desk with a glass of wine I never touched. In the bottom drawer sat every receipt and invoice from 8 years of family events, because I keep records the way my mother keeps up appearances. I started adding it all up. 19 events, over 8 years, priced the same as I'd charge any paying stranger. $26,800. I checked it twice. Same number, both times. I tried to bill them exactly once, the previous spring, for my parents' anniversary, groceries only, my labor free of charge. My mother showed up to Sunday dinner with the invoice in her purse, and actually cried at the table. After my 60th, we'll settle everything at once. I give you my word. I made her write it down that night. I still have that page, her words in my handwriting, her real signature underneath, looping and confident. I clipped it to the front of a manila folder right then. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't building a weapon. I was doing exactly what I do for every client who falls behind on payments. I was organizing the file. Records, not revenge. Now, the Cades. For days after that family meeting, Renee breezed into my kitchen with a leather folio and 6 menu revisions. Short ribs, gone. Beef tenderloin, and Marilee's preference. Deviled eggs, 2, backyard potluck, replaced with a raw bar, like the club serves. I wrote it all down, like the good vendor I was pretending to be. Then came the real point of the visit. Day of, can you wear something neutral? The Cades noticed details. At the door, almost as an afterthought, Mom told you about Josie, right? Good. Honestly, it's for the best. For the best. Best for who, exactly? I made one final honest attempt before I started looking for cracks in the walls. I called my mother with a compromise. Josie comes for cake, stays an hour, I take her home before the formal portraits start. My mother sighed, like I'd asked something outrageous. The photographer's policy is no children who can't sit still. Then, quieter, and frankly, Marin, after what she did to your grandmother's gravy boat, I'd think you'd want to keep her home yourself. I froze mid-stir. What she did to what? The gravy boat. The white one with the roses, at the engagement brunch. That child threw herself into the hutch and it shattered. Marilee saw the whole mess. Here's what I actually remember from that brunch, 13 months earlier. Josie glued to my side on the sun porch the entire afternoon, coloring with broken crayon nubs. A crash from somewhere inside the house. The dining room going silent. By the time I walked in, it had already been swept up, and nobody wanted to discuss it. My mother had never brought it up again, until now, when it was suddenly useful. My daughter is loud. She is not destructive, and she'd never been within 10 feet of that hutch. Someone had written her into a story that never happened, fed it to my mother, and let it calcify into fact. Which meant the ban wasn't policy at all. It was a verdict. And I was about to find out exactly who'd written it. You can't cross-examine a 5-year-old, so I went in sideways instead. Hey, Bug, remember great-grandma's little white boat thing? She didn't even look up from her drawing. Aunt Renee said don't touch it. So I colored instead. On the porch, with Miss Vivian. We counted ladybugs. 16. Kids give you the truth in little scraps. You just have to be willing to pick them up. Vivian Marsh, 87, Grandma June's closest friend of 60 years, had been on that porch too. I called my Aunt Pam first. She remembered the crash coming from inside while Josie was still outside, and she remembered walking in to find Renee at the hutch with a fistful of paper towels. I didn't see it break, Pam told me, but I saw who was cleaning it up in a hurry, and it wasn't a 5-year-old. Then I brought Vivian a lemon loaf, which in Millbrook is basically how you request sworn testimony. She'd had a clean line of sight into the dining room the whole time. She watched Renee reach past the hutch for her phone, catch the door with her elbow, and knock the gravy boat straight to the floor. Watched her freeze, sweep the pieces into a napkin, and tell my mother she'd take care of it. And the very next day, your mother's telling the Garden Society poor little Josie flung herself into the hutch, Vivian said, sharp now. That child was on the porch with me. I told your mother so myself, that same week, to her face. She didn't want to hear it. Of everything I uncovered that month, this was the piece that rearranged something in me, and it wasn't really about Renee, who'd broken a dish and lied about it, small and petty and human. What stopped me cold was my mother. She'd been handed the truth, straight from June's oldest friend, and she'd set it aside anyway, because the lie was more convenient. A policy needs a reason. A verdict only needs a story that sticks. I confronted Renee privately, calmly, laid the facts out in order, standing between racks at the bridal shop while she waited for a fitting. She didn't flinch, didn't deny a word of it. She's 5, Marin. She'll have forgotten the whole thing by Christmas. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters right now. Something tightened behind her eyes. You have no idea how much is riding on this party. Merrily already scared off Preston's last fiancé. One wild kid in one photo, and suddenly we're that family. She's not a wild kid. She's your niece. And you let a 5-year-old carry the blame for your broken dish for 13 months. Renee glanced at her new watch. The story landed where it landed. I'm not reopening it. Then, breezy, like she was commenting on the weather. Besides, after Saturday, none of this is going to matter anyway. Not the wedding. The wedding was still a year out. After Saturday. What exactly was Saturday supposed to settle? I tried unlocking the contracts myself. The bank required both signatures, plus a 30-day notice window. The party was 16 days out. I emailed my mother asking who'd authorized what, and who was actually covering the balance. What I got back was a 5-minute voicemail about being in labor with me for 22 hours, and how grief had turned me cold and transactional. Not one word about the money. I brought the folder to Sarah Ruiz, my closest friend since high school, now a paralegal at the only real firm in town. She flipped through it, the bookings, the guarantor paperwork, my mother's handwritten IOU, and tapped one line on the venue's day of schedule. Client of record. Photographer load in, 1 o'clock. Legacy set, plus backdrop. What's a legacy set? I didn't know. Something cold slid down the back of my neck, because whatever it was, nobody had bothered mentioning it to the person paying for the room it would be standing in. That Sunday, my father showed up unannounced with a toolbox and a flat of seedlings, fixed my leaking faucet, taught Josie one clean whistling note, and planted tomatoes with her in the bed Eli had built years earlier. Then, standing at my sink, not quite meeting my eyes, your mother, this party's bigger than a birthday, Marin. There are things, he stopped himself, folded it back up like a letter he'd decided not to send. Just make the ham the way your grandmother did. Everything goes smoother if the ham's right. He left, and I stood in a kitchen that no longer had a drip, but had clearly sprung a much bigger leak somewhere else. My father knew something. He'd carried it as far as my sink, and taken it right back home with him. Now I have to rewind 14 months, because you need to understand the $16,000. It started with my mother crying on the phone, real tears. My father's heart. His cardiologist wanted to place a stent, and there was a gap insurance wouldn't touch. On top of that, the roof over their back bedroom had started leaking badly. $16,000 would cover both. I asked for documentation and got it without hesitation, a real scheduling letter from the hospital, a real roofing estimate. I read every line, wired the money, wrote loan in the memo. My mother squeezed my hand and told me I was her rock. 3 weeks later, the procedure got postponed. The doctor wanted to try medication first. The roof could hold another season. I asked a few follow-up questions and got smooth, medically worded answers back. Then wedding season swallowed me whole, and grief has a way of fogging everything, and life just kept moving. It wasn't until I was assembling that folder at midnight, 3 weeks ago, that I laid the scheduling letter beside my bank statement and finally saw it. The procedure hadn't been postponed. It had been canceled. 2 days after my money hit their account. Somewhere out there, $16,000 of mine had gotten up from the table and walked off to do something else entirely. While I was busy excavating the past, the present kept sending its own bills. The guest count crept from 100 to 106. The carving station turned into a carving station plus a raw bar. 15 days out, I finally said the number out loud. Mom, this menu is running $9,500 at cost, before staffing. A pause, then a laugh as light as meringue. You're the caterer, sweetheart, not the guest of honor. Caterers manage. I looked out at my van, painted with my grandmother's old recipe box as a logo, Wildflower Kitchen, made with love since 2018, and answered in a voice so level it surprised even me. Yes. We do. It wasn't agreement. It was the sound of a lock deciding something. The coordinator called to confirm the final tasting, and mentioned, almost in passing, that the photographer would be dropping off his folder for the day's run of show. Your client on file, everything routes to you. Everything comes to the client of record eventually. The invoices, the schedules, and if a distracted assistant slips one manila folder into the wrong stack, other things too. It landed on a Wednesday, wedged between a linen invoice and a table diagram, a folder stamped Bell and Ives photography, that I was never meant to open. My company's name was right there on the delivery label. I was the client of record. So I opened it, flour still dusting my fingers. On top sat the run of show. Underneath, a laminated sheet, Callahan Family Legacy Session, booked by R. Callahan, 14 numbered frames. Frame 1, Diane and Walter, Porch Swing. Frame 3, Diane, Walter, Renee, Preston, Orchard Row. Frame 6, 3 generations, my mother, Renee, 2 of Preston's little nieces, borrowed for the shot. And a framed heirloom print, 24 by 36, meant for above the mantel. 14 photographs of my family. My daughter wasn't in a single one. Neither was I. And down at the bottom, in the photographer's shorthand, per R, no M plus J. No Marin. No Josie. I understood everything at once, the way you get a joke in your body before you can even explain why it's funny. She's too much, she'll ruin the photos. There were never going to be photos of her in the first place. There were never going to be photos of me either. The ban wasn't policy. It wasn't even a verdict. It was a crop. Somebody had redesigned my entire family for the camera, and cut my branch off the tree in writing, with initials, like a change order on a construction job. The whole party was a set. Which left exactly one question. What was Saturday actually for? Has your name ever gone missing from something you paid for, a photograph, a guest list, a will? Tell me about it below. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because that folder was only the beginning. What I found at the county records office is the part my family still wishes I'd never seen. I photocopied everything, and slid the folder back exactly where it had been. Staying calm means keeping your evidence boring. I called Aunt Pam and asked her outright. Is Saturday really about Mom's birthday? A long pause, hymns playing faintly on her kitchen radio. That party was never about her birthday, sweetheart. Come by after church Sunday. Some of this isn't mine to say over the phone. That night, I stood a long while in Josie's doorway, watching her sleep sideways across the mattress, one arm dangling off the edge. Too much for a photograph, according to people who'd never once watched her fall asleep clutching a jelly jar with a ladybug inside it, because Miss Vivian told her ladybugs bring good luck, and Josie wanted the luck ready when she woke up. Standing there, I felt the shape of what I was about to do settle into place, quietly, methodically, with receipts. No screaming, no dramatic phone calls. I'd handle this the way 8 years of thankless tables had trained me to handle everything. They were about to learn exactly what a caterer manages. I had legitimate business at Bell and Ives anyway. As the caterer, I needed the backdrop dimensions, so my staff wouldn't wool a dessert cart straight through golden hour portraits. The receptionist confirmed cheerfully. The legacy session was their premium package, 3 hours, 2 photographers, $2,600, booked back in February, deposit paid by check. The Callahans on Birchwood Lane. Lovely family. February. 10 months after my $16,000 had supposedly gone out to save a heart and a roof, and neither one had actually been saved. A $2,600 deposit, from a household that had cried poverty across my own kitchen table. I wrote the date in my folder and sat there doing the arithmetic that had somehow become my second job. That evening, Josie asked without glancing up from her coloring, "Is Grandma mad at me?" Aunt Renee said big parties aren't for wild girls. No self-pity in it, just information she'd overheard somewhere. I knelt down to her eye level. "You are not wild. You're alive. There's a difference, and the people who can't tell them apart don't get to decide anything about you." I told her about her own party instead, the sprinkler, the mud, her 3 best friends, Aunt Pam bringing ice cream and hot dogs, 0 vegetables allowed. "Is it my birthday?" "It's a just because party. Because you're mine." She accepted that completely, and went back to her purple dog drawing. Late that night, I spread everything across my desk like a caterer laying out a plated course, the 8-year ledger, my mother's signed promise, the canceled procedure letter next to my bank statement, the photocopied shot list, the day of schedule for a legacy session nobody had thought to mention to the woman funding it. I did the math on walking away entirely, somewhere around $42,000, all told, plus penalties, plus a lesson handed straight to my daughter that the loud people always win, and the quiet ones just cater. That last part was the line item I couldn't live with. So I picked the option nobody would see coming, because it didn't require raising my voice at all. I would cook that party beautifully, every dish straight out of Grandma June's tin box, made exactly her way. I would fulfill every single line of every contract my mother had signed under my name. And when the room was full, and the glasses were raised, I was going to serve the truth for dessert. Calmly. In order. With copies. Monday morning, Sarah slid my own contracts back across her desk and said the sentence that flipped everything. "Marin, you're the client." 3 weeks of feeling completely boxed in, and Sarah found the exit in 1 weekend. "Your mother booked everything under Wildflower Kitchen to dodge deposits. Which means, on paper, this isn't her party. It's your event." She underlined a clause, "The client sets the program. The client may address guests at the client's own event. The client approves any charges added after signing." She built the cage. Then she put your name on the deed to it. 3 weeks of feeling cornered, and the corner turned out to be a throne with my name carved into it. "Whatever you're planning to do with that microphone," Sarah said, "stick to facts, and paper every single one of them. Truth is a complete defense. Don't speculate, don't diagnose anybody. Just read the documents. You're good at documents." Then her expression shifted. She turned her laptop toward me. "One more thing, before you finalize anything. You need to see what got filed at the county recorder's office. The Lake Cottage on Willow Lake. Current owners, Walter and Diane Callahan. Beside it, Sarah's sticky note, quitclaim deed, Callahan to Callahan, grantee Renee E. Callahan. Grandma June's lake cottage. Notary appointment booked for the Monday after the party, 9 a.m. 2 days later. I sat very still and let the pieces click into place, one after another, like place settings going down on a table. Saturday, a golden hour legacy session, a wall-sized portrait, a barn full of witnesses watching the Callahans glow, the Cades reassured, the engagement locked in tight. Monday, 9 sharp, before the flowers even wilted, the cottage signed over, the whole future notarized. After Saturday, none of this is going to matter. That's what Renee had told me at the bridal shop. She genuinely believed Saturday was their finish line. She had no idea I was the one holding every single contract they'd be celebrating under. The cottage was my parents' to give away, that's just the law, and I never once planned on fighting it. The only thing I actually got to decide was this, whether they signed it away in a fog of lies, or in broad daylight, in front of every single witness they'd invited to watch them shine. Thursday brought the final tasting, and the Cades came, merrily in expensive linen, Gordon with a handshake like a bank vault closing. I'd set the table with June's ham, her rolls, the tenderloin Marilee had requested, her apple stack cake sliced thin. My mother swept through, conducting introductions like a symphony, and got to me last. And this is Marin, our caterer. She handles all our little gatherings. Oh, Marilee said, glancing between our matching jawlines. Aren't you the sister? She's the food person, my mother said smoothly, and steered her away before another word could land. It didn't sting the way it would have a month before. You can't insult the help when the help is holding the deed to the whole evening. Preston lingered behind, working on a second slice of ham. This is your grandmother's recipe, right? Renee never talks about her. No, I said. I don't imagine she does. Friday night, 7 days out, I finished the folder. Here's exactly what went into it, because the contents were the entire strategy. 1. The 8-year ledger, $26,800, my mother's signed promise clipped to the front. 2. This party's own invoice, $9,500 it cost, every add-on documented in full. 3. The photocopied shot list, 14 frames, the pencil note I no longer needed to reread to remember. 4. The hospital letter beside my bank statement, $16,000 out, procedure canceled 2 days later. 5. The auditor's parcel printout for the lake cottage, clipped to the notary appointment half the county already seemed to know about. 3 copies of everything, tabbed like a closing packet. If my family wanted to treat me like a vendor, they were going to get vendor-grade paperwork. Then I wrote 1 single page, in plain language. No speech, no flourishes. Just the order I intended to read things in, timed under 5 minutes. Later that night, headlights swept across my kitchen window. My father, at 10 p.m., holding a box of tomatoes. He talked about the seedlings first, then got as close as he's ever gotten to the truth. Whatever you're feeling about your mother, hold on to it till after. Just till after. Your mother's been scared for so long, she's forgotten what of. We need this to go well, Marin. More than you know. I looked at this man who'd taught my daughter to whistle, who'd sat silent at every table where his wife rewrote the record right in front of him, and I gave him one door, wide open. Dad, did you know Josie isn't in a single photograph tomorrow? His hand went still on the cap. He looked down at the tomatoes for a long moment. Then he put the cap back on. Good night, kiddo. And walked back out into the dark. He hadn't said yes. He hadn't said no. A silence that deliberate is its own kind of answer. That was the night I stopped waiting for anyone in that house to choose us. It simplified things, the way a hard frost simplifies a garden overnight. Sunday, Pam's kitchen, the part that wasn't hers to say over the phone. She slid a heavy engraved card across the table. New member reception. The Millbrook Hunt Club is pleased to welcome Walter and Diane Callahan. Sponsored by Gordon Cade. Initiations 13,000, Pam said. Your mother told me herself, couldn't help it. Same spring she sat right here in this kitchen, crying poor about your daddy's heart. 13 for the club, 2,600 for the photography deposit. 16,000, almost to the dollar. My money hadn't vanished. It had been repurposed into a membership sponsored by Gordon Cade, and into 14 frames I wasn't anywhere in. Who signed the checks, Pam? Whose handwriting do you think pays for anything in that house, honey? Your mother hasn't written a check since the 90s. My father. My steady, tomato-growing father, who 2 nights earlier had asked me to hold it till after. Not a bystander to the fog. The bookkeeper of it. 5 days to Saturday. I picked the morning my mother gets her hair done, so I could have my father without his editor standing beside him. I laid the club card on the picnic table between us like a found wallet. He sat down slowly, took off his cap, and for the first time in my adult life, talked to me honestly about money. Nobody plans on being old and broke, Marin. The pension from the shop is thin. The roof needs work I can't climb up and do myself anymore. Your mother looked at that club, at the Cades, at Renee marrying up, and saw a lifeboat for the both of us. Somewhere we'd matter. People who'd look after us once I couldn't. His thumb worked the brim of his cap. And I looked at you. You've been the one keeping your head above water since you were a kid. Eli passes, and 6 months later you're catering a wedding with a baby on your hip. Some people, you stop worrying about them. It isn't fair. I know it isn't. You looked at me and saw a bank account, Dad, I said, as gently as I could manage. He didn't argue. They hadn't taken from me out of contempt. They'd taken from me out of confidence. I was the daughter who could absorb the hit. I kissed the top of his head, and drove to work. For days out, load-in day at Cedar Hollow. I handed Nora, the coordinator, my amended schedule, one new line, right after the toast. A word from the caterer. She read it, clicked her pen once. Your event, Marin. Your program. That was the whole conversation. At the drink station, I found a stack of printed programs, Renee's doing, Callahan Family Legacy, 60 Years of Grace. Toast at 5, followed by family portraits, immediate family only. I folded one into my apron pocket and set the rest back down square. Home by 9. Pam had Josie for a sleepover, ice cream for dinner, negotiations concluded entirely without my input. I pressed my white chef coat, packed the 3 folders into my knife bag right next to the boning knife. Last, I lifted Grandma June's tin recipe box off its shelf. Tomorrow I'm serving your ham, I told it, alone in my kitchen, and the truth. Both made from scratch. If someone in your family has ever treated what you give them like a subscription they never had to pay for, type receipts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I need to know I'm not the only person out there who finally sat down and added it all up. The party. Saturday, 4 o'clock. Cedar Hollow filled up like a church on Easter Sunday. 106 guests, Pastor Reyes, the entire Garden Society, June's Old Bridge Circle led by Vivian Marsh with her cane and her good brooch. The cade table sat dead center. The barn smelled like my grandmother's kitchen, because I'd baked her rolls that morning and glazed the ham twice over. Vivian caught my wrist at the service line. June's ham. 60 years I've been trying to pry the glaze recipe out of somebody. Then she looked past me toward the doors. Where's our little Josie bug? I told her Josie was at Pam's, having her own party, and Vivian studied me a beat too long. She'd heard something already. The bridge circle had all heard something. My mother, meanwhile, was radiant. You'd never have guessed she was terrified underneath it. She drifted between tables, one eye always tracking the photographer building his setup by the fireplace. Umbrella lights, 2 rows of chairs, a cream backdrop. Renee checked her lipstick in the reflection of a butter knife. At 4:55, the assistant started squaring the chairs with a tape measure. A spoon rang against crystal. My mother rose, glass raised, pearl earrings catching the light, and delivered the toast she'd clearly been rehearsing since April. 60 wonderful years, Pastor Reyes's guidance, the Garden Society's friendship, a small nod to the Cades for welcoming our Renee into such a beautiful family. Legacy. Blessings. Roots and branches. She did not mention the branch she'd had removed. She did not mention the 5-year-old eating ice cream at her aunt's house, or the caterer standing at the service line in full whites, the 2 people in the room who had actually paid for this evening. Applause rippled through the barn. Then the photographer stepped forward, folding his hands together. Family portraits by the fireplace while we've got the light. Immediate family only, please. The phrase moved through June's bridge circle like a cold draft under a door. Chairs got arranged, my mother center, my father at her shoulder, Renee and Preston flanking, 2 of Preston's little nieces seated in front, where a granddaughter might otherwise have stood. My mother scanned the barn, found me at the service line, and delivered the line she'd apparently been saving my whole life, pitched to carry to every corner of the room. You can wait by the kitchen, sweetheart. This part's just for family. The barn went completely still. Vivian set her glass down. I looked at my mother. I looked at that backdrop with no room anywhere for my daughter. And I reached back and untied my apron. I folded it over my arm and didn't raise my voice at all, because the quietest person holding the best information owns the whole room. Actually, Mom, the kitchen can wait. I'd like to give you your birthday present in front of everyone. It's the same thing I've been giving this family for 8 years. The bill just says it better than I could. A ripple moved through the crowd, half laugh, half sharp inhale, the sound a room makes when it can't yet tell whether something is charming or historic. Marin, sweetheart, my mother said through a smile that had stopped reaching her eyes, not now. It's on the program, Mom. Nora nodded once from the doorway. That's the program, confirmed to no one and everyone at once. I walked to the center of the floor, set my knife bag on an empty chair, and opened the first folder. 106 faces. Forks going still. Pastor Reyes motionless. Vivian leaning forward on her cane like she was watching a horse race. Merrily Cade recalculating me in real time. My father, hands flat on the tablecloth, staring straight at them. My mother, center of her own backdrop, exactly where she'd always wanted to stand, in front of every witness she'd spent months collecting. I hadn't gathered anyone. I was simply borrowing the room she'd already filled. 3 weeks ago, my mother handed me my assignment for tonight. So let's start with what tonight cost. I read the totals out like a delivery manifest. 106 guests, 4 courses, carving station, raw bar, naked cake, $9,500 at cost, every single dish my grandmother's recipe. This is the 20th family event I've catered. I turned the page. 20 events, 8 years, every holiday, every funeral, priced the same as I'd charge any stranger in this room. $26,800. Never billed, except once. I held up her looping signature. When my mother promised, in writing, at her own anniversary dinner, that we'd settle everything up after her 60th. Which is tonight. The room had gone quiet enough to hear the ice settling in the glasses. So, Mom. Happy birthday. Here's your settlement. I laid the full ledger down on the gift table, stamped in red, paid in full. Consider it my last gift from the caterer. Someone in the back whispered 26,000 a little too loudly, the way small towns clock and log everything. Renee came halfway out of her chair. This is not the time. You're right. The time was February, when you booked a photographer. I opened the second folder. This is the Callahan Family Legacy Session, booked by R. Callahan. 14 frames, ending in a portrait meant for above the mantel. I read a few aloud. Diane and Walter on the porch swing, 3 generations, Preston's nieces standing in, then looked up. My daughter isn't exactly none of the 14. Neither am I. And down at the bottom, in the photographer's own handwriting, no Marin, no Josie. I turned to face him. Is that your shot list? He glanced at Renee, then my mother. That's the booking. Yes, ma'am. 3 weeks ago I was told Josie was banned because she's too much, she'd ruin the photographs. There were never going to be photographs of her at all. Too much had nothing to do with it. A 5-year-old got cut out of this family in pencil, and the gravy boat story was the cover for it. A cane struck the floor. Vivian Marsh rose, brooch catching the light. That child never touched that gravy boat. She was on the porch with me, counting ladybugs, when it broke. I told Diane so that very week. I'll say it louder now, if I need to. 106 heads turned from Vivian to Renee. Merrily turned to Renee very, very slowly. Which brings us to the money. I laid out the third folder piece by piece. The hospital letter beside my bank statement, $16,000 loan for a heart procedure, canceled 2 days after the money landed. The photography deposit, $2,600, received in February from the Callahans. The country club card, $13,000, sponsored by Gordon Cade. 13 and 2,600 is 16,000. I thought I was paying for my father's heart. I paid for this backdrop instead. And for the club that this evening's guest list got recruited from. Gordon Cade stood, buttoning his jacket. Merrily. We'll be calling the Callahans on Monday. The sound of the Cades gathering their things was like a tide pulling back out. My mother finally broke, not into an apology, into a performance. Both hands pressed to her pearls, a voice climbing toward the rafters. After everything this family has sacrificed for you, I am 60 years old, this is my birthday, and she shows up here with folders. I let her run with it. Every second she performed, the room got a longer, clearer look at her. Then I turned to my father, sitting motionless at the head table, hands flat against the cloth. Dad. Did you know Josie wasn't in a single frame? The silence stretched long enough that the umbrella light started buzzing. He lifted his head and looked at me, not at my mother, at me. We needed this to go well, Marin. No denial. No, I didn't know, kiddo. The one sentence a careful man allows himself, and it answered every question I'd asked. He went pale, like a fundamentally honest man finally caught in the one lie of his life. Now I know, I said, and turned back to face the room. My mother found a second wind, aimed straight at me. You've always resented your sister. Ever since Eli died, you've been so bitter, Marin. This is grief talking. She needs help. Pastor Reyes stood and rested one hand gently on her shoulder. It landed like a verdict. No, Mom, I said. I'm doing this because you taught me to keep good books. I'm just reading them out loud. At the Cade table, Preston pulled the flower from his lapel, set it down on the cloth, said something too quiet to catch, and walked to the door to hold it open for his mother. Renee stood frozen in front of her cream backdrop, perfectly lit, entirely unphotographed. I picked my apron back up. Please, everyone, stay. Enjoy the food. Every recipe is my grandmother's, straight out of that tin box on the table there. She fed people like she meant it. That part of this family is still free. Then, to my parents, quietly, though, quietly, now included 106 witnesses, Monday at 9, you'll sign whatever you're going to sign. The cottage is legally yours to give away, and I won't fight that. But hear me. Josie and I are not props you crop out when the picture gets too crowded. As of tonight, the family account with Wildflower Kitchen is closed. Permanently. I slid my house key off my ring, the spare I'd given my father years back, and set it on the tablecloth beside his coffee cup. Sundays are done, Dad. When she asks about you, I'll tell her you love her. Because that part's true. It just isn't enough. I lifted Grandma June's recipe tin off the display table and tucked it under my arm. This comes home with us. I laid my apron down beside the stamped ledger, the uniform and the bill, side by side, and walked toward the doors. I didn't rush, and I didn't look back once. Behind me, a cane found the floor. Vivian Marsh rose and followed me out at her own unhurried pace, and one by one the rest of June's bridge circle fell in behind her, gathering their good purses. They didn't storm out. Women that age don't storm anywhere, they depart, which is somehow so much worse. 2 tables from the Garden Society rose after them, murmuring about calling sitters. Nora held the door with a face of perfect professional neutrality and eyes that were basically a standing ovation. I wasn't around for what happened next. Pam told me later, without dressing it up at all, the barn was a third empty before the cake even got cut. The photographer quietly packed up his lights without being asked to. At some point, my mother stood alone in front of that cream backdrop, 60 years old, perfectly lit, with nobody left to impress, and nobody at all in the frame beside her. Sunday morning, my backyard hosted the actual event of the season. 6 5-year-olds, 1 sprinkler, unlimited mud. Pam brought ice cream, Vivian brought a jelly jar, because a promise about ladybugs is still a promise. Josie wore her swimsuit and a paper crown, and ran the whole thing like a tiny, soaking wet mayor. Too much for their photographs. Exactly enough for a real childhood. The only picture I took that whole weekend hangs above my desk now. Josie mid-leap through the sprinkler, airborne, shrieking, entirely blurred. Best photograph in the family, hands down. Monday at 9, the deed got signed. The wedding was postponed indefinitely. The Hunt Club tabled my parents' membership pending sponsor review, club language for the Cades quietly pulling their name off the lifeboat. 3 weeks later, a listing went up online, Lakefront Cottage, Willow Lake, price to move. Renee, sitting on wedding deposits with no wedding left to attach them to, was selling Grandma June's cottage just to cover the bills for a legacy that never made it past Labor Day. I let myself grieve that for exactly 1 evening. Then an envelope arrived in my father's handwriting. No letter inside, just a check for $16,000, and on a torn half sheet of paper, in pencil, it was yours. I'm sorry I knew. Pam told me later he'd sold the old pickup he'd been restoring since before I was born. I deposited the check straight into Josie's college fund that same afternoon. I didn't call him. He didn't call me either. Some accounts get settled. Some you just quietly stop carrying. Wildflower Kitchen booked solid through the fall within a single month, half strangers, half guests from that night. 106 witnesses make for excellent word of mouth. People kept requesting one dish by name, specifically, the ham that made the Garden Society cry. Grandma June, headlining again, at long last. My mother's voicemails came weekly, then monthly, then finally stopped altogether. I never blocked her number. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors with locks that actually work now. In December, a card showed up addressed to both of us. Christmas Eve, just us, no cameras. I've read it a dozen times over. I still haven't answered. It stuck to the refrigerator, under a magnet Josie made in art class. Here's what I know now, and you're welcome to stitch it onto a pillow if you need it the way I did. People who actually love you make room for you in the picture. And a child who's too much for somebody's photograph is usually the only real thing left in the room. That's my story. 8 years of free tables, 14 frames we weren't in, and 1 red stamp that said paid in full. If this reminded you of a bill somebody's been letting you quietly carry, set it down this week. You're allowed to. And if you know a mother who's ever been treated like the help at her own family's table, send her this video, drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.